Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for listening and for coming back for episode number 2 of Storytime with Rob. Thank you guys so much for all the kind words and all the encouragement about the first episode. It's definitely a little learning curve not having Nick here with me, but I think this is definitely something that's enjoyable and different, especially for the channel. Considering that our main episodes are primarily comedy-based, but like I said in this week's past main episode, I think it's a good contrast in comparison with the main. So hopefully we'll be able to continue to do these, and you guys will enjoy them. First episode we talked about three stories that we'd previously talked about the search and rescue. This week we're going to pretty much continue that. Finish off, I think there may be 3 more stories. That may be subject to change depending on what I have. I haven't looked into how many there is total, but we'll continue off with that series there and hopefully finish it up. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Hey guys, I'm back from my training op and I have a lot of really interesting stories to share with you. I've got enough that I'm going to break them up into 2 parts, this being the first. I'd love to put them all in one entry, but I haven't had a chance to write them all down yet. I didn't have anything too crazy happen while I was out there, but we did have one incident with a rookie that I found relevant. Since I'm sure you guys have been waiting for these, I'll just get right into the stories. I'll assign each batch of stories to the person who told them to me. And the first one here is from KD. KD is a vet who has been a search and rescue officer for about 15 years. She specializes in high elevation mountain rescues and is widely considered one of the best in her field. She was one of the more enthusiastic storytellers, and since we're together a fair amount during the exercises, she ended up telling me about 4 that really stuck with me. The first she told me was in response to my asking about her most traumatic calls. She had shook her head and told me that really bad calls happen more frequently on the mountain since the potential for nasty accidents is higher. About 5 years ago, one of the parks she worked at had a string of disappearances. It was a bad year, she said, one of the worst on record as far as weather went. They were getting about a foot of new snow every couple of days, and there were a few avalanches that killed some climbers. They warn people about staying in the mapped areas, but of course there's always those who don't listen. And in one particularly nasty case, an entire family got wiped out because the father decided that he knew better than the officials and took them out into an area that wasn't safe. They were snowshoeing, and as best as Katie could figure, they walked up to a shelf of snow that looked solid but actually wasn't. It gave way, and his family went ass over tea kettle almost 300 feet down a slope. They landed on the rocks at the bottom, and the parents died instantly. One of the kids did as well, but the other 2 survived. One had a broken leg and fractured ribs, and the other almost unharmed, save for some bruising and sprained ankle. The uninjured child left his sibling behind and set out to find help. Katie said the kid didn't make it more than a half mile before the storm overtook him. Kid stopped to try to get warm or maybe just to rest and ended up freezing to death. They ended up finding the family with the help of witnesses who saw them heading into the wilderness, and she was the one to find the kid who'd frozen to death looking for help. She said it had started to snow, just enough to obscure long-distance vision, but not enough to make searching impossible. She saw a figure sitting in the snow up ahead, and she got to it as quickly as possible. She described in detail how as she got closer, she realized first that it was a child, second that they were deceased, and third that they had frozen in one of the most pitiful positions she's ever found a corpse in. The kid was sitting upright with his knees tucked up against his chest. His arms were curled around them, and his head was tucked up in his coat. When she moved the coat to look at his face, she saw that he had died crying. His face was twisted and the tears were frozen on his cheeks. She said it was painfully obvious that the kid was terrified when he succumbed to hypothermia, and as a mother, it broke her heart. She told me repeatedly that she hopes the father is burning in hell as we speak. The other story she told me that stood out in my mind was one that happened when she was a rookie. Her team got a report of an experienced climber who hadn't come home the previous day. His wife was convinced that something bad had happened because he'd never failed to come home on time. They went out looking for him and had to climb what sounded like some very technically challenging parts of the mountains. They got to a relatively flat area, and KD started to see blood in the snow. She followed the trail, and as she went, she started seeing little bits of tissue. She wasn't sure exactly what body part it had came from, but the farther she followed it, the more there was. She follows this blood and tissue trail to a sheltered area under the cliff face, and she finds the climber. She said that there was so much blood, more than she'd ever seen before. He was lying face down, one arm stretched in front of him as if he died crawling. She looks closer and seen that he's been partially disemboweled, which is where the tissue she'd seen had come from. The guy had an ice pick tucked into a hip holster, and it was covered in blood. Of course, they'll never be sure exactly what happened, but she said as best as she can figure, this is what went down. The guy had been attempting to climb up the next area and had been using his ice axe to ascend. He probably hit a loose patch and had fallen. On the way down, or possibly when he'd landed, he got impaled by the axe and it had disemboweled him. He drug himself along, tearing pieces of himself out as he went, and had died under the cliff face. She isn't terribly bothered by gore, but I guess a few of the guys who came to help her remove the body threw up when they turned him over, and a good portion of his intestines spilled out. I mentioned to her that I was interested in hearing about any experiences she had with people completely disappearing, and her eyes lit up and she leaned in close to me.
"Want to hear a real doozy?"
she asks. And she tells me about how when she'd first started, there was this case that got a lot of attention in the media. A family had been out berry picking in the area of the forest very close to the entrance of the park. They had 2 little boys, both under the age of 5, and at some point during the day, one of them vanishes. There's an absolute massive search, and they find nothing. It's another of those cases like the kid was never there in the first place. The dogs just sit down and don't pick up on anything. No trace of the kid is found. The search goes on for about 2 months, but is eventually called off. Fast forward 6 months later, the family comes back to place flowers at a memorial that's been set up for the kid. They bring their other son, and while they were placing the flowers, they lose sight of the kid for about 3 seconds, and in that span of time, he vanishes into thin air. Now, obviously, the parents are beyond devastated. It's awful enough to lose 1 child, but to lose 2 is beyond imagining. The search is huge, one of the biggest in state history. There are about 300 volunteers combing every inch of this park looking for the kid. But again, there's no trace of him. The search goes on for about a week, with people looking miles from the part of the park where he vanished from. And then almost 2 weeks later, a volunteer almost 15 miles from the designated search area radios in that he's found the kid. They assume that the kid was dead, but the volunteer says he's not only alive, but he's in good shape. KD and her team go to recover the kid, and when they get there, she can't believe that this is the kid that's been missing. His clothes are clean, there's no dirt on him anywhere, and he doesn't appear to be traumatized. The volunteer says he found the kid sitting on a log, playing with little twig bundle that's bound together with some old rope. KD asks him where he had been, who he was with for those 2 weeks, and the kid tells her that he's been with the Fuzzy Man. Now, KD firmly believes in Bigfoot, so she gets all excited and asks what he means by fuzzy. Was he hairy? But the kid said no, he wasn't Harry. He was a fuzzy man, and described that the man was blurry, like when you close your eyes but not all the way closed. He says the man came out of the trees and took the kids with him deep into the woods. The kid said he slept in a hollow tree and the fuzzy man gave him berries to eat. And Katie asks if the man was mean, if he'd scared the kid, and the kid says no, he wasn't scary, but I didn't like how he didn't have eyes. Katie says they get the kid back to headquarters and a cop takes him into town and talks to him more about what happened. She's friends with the cop that talked to him, and she said the kid described being kept in this tree by the fuzzy man and given berries whenever he was hungry. He was allowed to wander around in very specific clearing, but when he tried to go further, the fuzzy man would get mad and yell really loud even though he didn't have a mouth. When the kid got scared at night, the fuzzy man made it go brighter and gave him a twig bundle. He said the fuzzy man was going to keep him, but that he had to let him go because the kid wasn't the right kind. He either can't or won't elaborate more on that. The cops are just sort of left scratching their head, and the search for his brother renewed with no results. The kid has no idea where his brother might be, and they never found him. The last story that Katie told me was of something that happened to her when she got separated from her training group when she was a rookie. They were learning the basics of high elevation belaying on a well-mapped side of the mountain, and she had to use the bathroom. She went about 50 yards from the group during a meal break and did her business. I'll tell the rest exactly as she told it to me.
So I go to take a piss, and once I'm done, I start going back to the group, but I've only gotten about 5 feet when I realized I have no idea where I am. And this wasn't I got turned around lost. I mean, I had literally no fucking clue where I was. And if you ask me, I don't even think I've been able to tell you what state we were in. It was sort of how I imagine people with amnesia would feel, you know? You're completely lost, and you have no idea what to do. So I stood there for a while, just trying to figure out where the fuck I was and what I was supposed to do. But the longer I stand there, the more confused and turned around I get, so I started walking. As I recall, I just picked up a random direction and went for it. And as I'm walking, it's just getting worse and worse, to the point to where I have no concept why I'm on the mountain in the first place. I'm just trudging through the snow, and then I start hearing a voice. It's kind of inside my head almost, like if a frog could talk, all low and croaky, and it's telling me over and over, it's okay, it's okay. You just need to find something to eat. Find something to eat and you'll be okay. Just keep walking and find something to eat, eat. So I start looking around for anything I can eat, and I swear to God I've never felt that hunger in my whole life. It was bottomless, and I think I've eaten just about anything you can put right in front of me then. I had no concept of time, so I had no idea how long I'd been out there, when I hear an actual voice coming toward me. I go toward it and see one of the other search and rescue officers, and he looks fucking terrified. He's running towards me asking if I'm okay and what the hell I'm doing out here. And the scary thing was, as he was running towards me, I kind of see myself reaching into my belt for my hunting knife. I'm not really thinking about what I'm doing, but what I am thinking is that I have to eat. If I don't eat, I'll never be okay again, so I just have to eat. He sees me doing that and he backs off right away. He yells at me to put my knife away and that he's not gonna hurt me, and then I kind of snap back. All of a sudden, I know exactly where I am, and I put the knife away. I run to him and ask him how long I've been gone, thinking he'll tell me I've been gone for a half hour or so, but he tells me I've been gone for 2 fucking days. I've gone over 2 peaks and ended up almost on the other side of the mountain. And if I'd kept going, I would have ended up wandering into the 300 miles of wilderness. They'd have never found me. He can't believe I'm not dead, and of course I don't know what the fuck to think. To me, no time has passed at all. I don't say anything. I just go back with him to a rendezvous point, and I'm taken back to HQ to be airlifted to the hospital. When I get there, they do all kinds of tests and try to figure out what happened. As best they can guess, I had some type of weird fugue state that's kinda like amnesia, or a weird seizure that knocked my brain out of whack. But the truth is that we really don't know. It's never happened again, but I'll tell you, ever since then, I never go out there alone. People rag on me for making them come with me when I leave the group, but I just tell them that listening to me piss in the snow is better than losing me for 2 fucking days on a freezing mountain.
The next person I talked to was EW, a former trainer who now works as an EMT. He still comes to ops like this to help out, but doesn't work full-time for us anymore. He specialized in finding lost kids. He just seemed to have a sixth sense of it whenever it came to knowing where they'd gone. He's a legend among the more senior vets, but he gets embarrassed if you compliment him on his work. He sat down with me at dinner one evening and we ended up swapping stories. Most of them were just casual, but when we got to the subject of our weirder calls, I mentioned that I had a buddy who'd gone up the set of stairs, and he kinda got quiet and asked me if I heard of the little boy who disappeared from his park a few years back. I hadn't, so he told me the story. They were out looking for this 11-year-old boy, Joey, who'd gone missing near a river. Of course, the first thought was that he'd fallen in and drowned, but when they brought the dogs out, they led search and rescue officers away from the river and up a very densely forested area. When we do searches for people, we search in grid patterns, and we search every box of the grid incredibly thoroughly. What EW's team noticed right away was that there was a very strange pattern emerging. Dogs in alternating boxes were picking up Joey's scent, but losing it when they overlapped with another box. If you think of a checkerboard, Joey's scent was being picked up in random black squares, but never in red. This, of course, didn't make any sense because how could the kid bounce from area to area without leaving scent in each place that he passed? EW and his partner passed into a new box of the grid, and EW notices a set of stairs about 50 yards away. He tells his partner that they need to go check near it, but his partner flat out refuses. He tells EW that he's made it a point never to go near any stairs that he sees, and while it may be routine, he's not to pretend that it's normal. He tells EW that he'll wait in sight while EW checks. EW, of course, says he was irritated, but he felt for the guy and didn't push him on the subject.
I walked over to the stairs. They were small, kind of like stairs to a basement. I don't really feel strongly one way or the other about them. The stairs, I mean, so I wasn't scared or anything. I guess I'm just like everyone else, and I just prefer not to think about them too much. Anyway, I went over and I could see that there was something lying on the bottom step, sort of curled up. My heart sinks, because of course you always hope for the best. And we were confident that we'd find this kid alive because he'd only been missing for a few hours. But I knew right away that it was him and that he was dead. He was curled up in a little ball on the step, holding his stomach. It looked like he'd been in horrible pain when he died, but I didn't see any blood except for some on his lips and chin. I radioed in that I'd found him, and we got his body back to command. That poor family. They were devastated. The parents couldn't understand how he'd be dead because he'd only been gone for such a short amount of time. And on top of that, we didn't have any obvious cause of death, which just made it worse. I figured he'd probably eaten something poisonous since he was holding his stomach when I found him, but I didn't want to guess. It's hard enough to hear that your kid is dead, let alone have some stupid search and rescue guy guessing about what happened. They took him away, and I went home and tried not to think about it. I hate finding dead kids, man. I love this job, but it's one of the reasons why I left. I've got 2 daughters, and the thought of losing them that way just...
He choked up a little here. I'm not great with emotional stuff like that, and it's always sort of awkward to see a grown man cry, so I really didn't know what to do. He pulled himself together eventually, though, and he kept going.
We don't always hear back from the coroner about the cause of death. It's not really our job to know, I guess, and sometimes if they think it's foul play, they won't tell us because of legal bullshit. But I've got a friend who works for the sheriff department, and he'll usually pass along any interesting info if I ask. In this case, though, I actually got a call from him about a week later. He asks if I remember the kid, and of course I do. And he says some seriously weird shit is going on. He tells me, "EW man, you're gonna think I'm crazy, but the coroner has no idea what happened to this kid. He's never seen anything like it." My friend goes on to tell me that when the coroner opened the kid up, he couldn't even believe what he was seeing. The kid's organs were like Swiss cheese. Quarter-size holes were punched clean through about every single organ this kid had, aside from his heart and lungs. But his colon, his stomach, his kidneys, and even one of his testicles were full of these clean holes. My friend said the coroner described it as if someone had taken a hole punch and punched the holes out of everything. They were so neat. But the kid didn't have a scratch on him, no entry or exit wounds. The closest anyone here had ever seen anything like it was a guy who'd filled himself full of buckshot a year back when cleaning his rifle. No one had a clue what could have possibly caused it. My friend asked me if I'd ever seen anything like it, or if we'd had similar cases in the past, but I'd never even heard of something like that and told him I wasn't going to be any help on him. As far as I know, the coroner determined the cause of death as something like massive internal bleeding, but no one knows really what happened. I've never been able to forget that kid. I have nightmares about it sometimes. I don't let my kids go into the woods alone, and we go together. I never let them out of my sight. I used to love it out here, but that case and a couple others just sort of ruined it for me.
Dinner was over, so we started to clean up and go back to our cabins. Before we went our separate ways, he put his hand on my shoulder and looked at me really close. He tells me that there's bad things out here. Things that don't care if we have families or lives, or that we can think and feel. He tells me to be careful, and he walks away. I didn't get a chance to talk with him again, but that story stuck with me. Now, by pure coincidence, I've got to talk to another vet, PB, who's been in the search and rescue field for years. We were partnered on a grid sweep during the training exercise, and we were chatting casually about how we liked the job and what kinds of things we'd seen and the like. At one point, we passed an old set of stairs, though these were probably from an old fire lookout given the area that we were in. I sort of casually mentioned that I was curious about the stairs and that I wish I knew more about them. He got kind of quiet and looked like he wanted to tell me something, but wasn't sure if he should. Finally, he told me to turn my radio off. Obviously, this is something we are never, ever supposed to do, but I did it, and he did the same. About 7 years ago, he tells me, he was out on a call with a rookie. They were in an area of the park that had a lot of strange reports and events. Disappearances, stories, and lights in the forest. Odd noises, things like that. The rookie was totally spooked, kept going on and on about things out in that woods. According to PB,
the guy wouldn't stop talking about the goat man. Just on and on. Goat man this and goat man that. Finally, I told him that there was plenty else to be afraid of out there that was very real, and that he'd better get over this thing with the goat man. The rookie wanted to know what kinds of things I was talking about, and I just told him to shut up and walk. We crested a little ridge, and there was a staircase about 10 yards ahead. The rookie stops dead in his tracks and just stands there looking at them. I tell him, "See, that's something you should be afraid of." The rookie asks me what the hell these things are doing out here, and for some reason, I just open up and tell him the truth. Or what I've been told is the truth. I could have gotten in a lot of trouble for doing what I did, and I could get in a lot of trouble for repeating it to you. But you're a nice kid, and I want you to stop looking into this. Quit while you're ahead. So I'll tell you what I know under the condition that you never breathe a word to this to the Supes.
Well, I told him I wouldn't say a word, and he double-checks that our radios are off.
When I first started out, we were a little less tight-lipped about them and other things that happened out here. We warned people before they were even hired that there was a lot of weird shit going on. I guess the Forest Service was tired of having such a massive turnover rate, and they wanted people to know what they were getting into. So they started having people sign these agreements that wouldn't go to the media with what they were about to see. The Forest Service didn't want to scare people away, so the last thing they needed were spooked rookies running off to the media with stories of ghosts and haunted stairs. But eventually they found that the agreements weren't necessary. People not only didn't want to talk about what they saw, they wouldn't. A few times media tried to talk to people when kids or hikers would disappear and no one would say a word. I can't really explain it. I guess we just don't really want to admit that anything is wrong. This is our job, to be out in the woods every single day. We don't need to be spooked, and the best way to avoid that is to pretend like everything's okay. So I'll tell you everything I can think of, and after that, I'm done talking about it for good. And I expect you not to bring it up around me ever. The stairs have been out there as long as the parks have existed. We have records going back decades describing them. Sometimes people go up them and nothing happens. Other times... Look, I really don't like talking about this, but sometimes really bad shit happens. I saw one guy get his hand sliced clean off when he got to the top step. He reached out to touch the tree branch, and it happened so fast. 1 second his hand was there, and the next it was gone. Completely clean wound. We didn't find his hand, and the guy almost died. Another time a woman touched one of the stairs, and the blood vessel in her brain exploded. Literally exploded like a water balloon. She sort of stumbled down and came over to me, and all she got out was,
"I think something's wrong with me."
She dropped like a sack of flour, dead before she hit the ground. I'll never forget the way the blood leaked into the inside of her eye. Before she died, I watched it turn red. I watched it happen, and there wasn't a single thing I could do to help. We warn people not to go anywhere near them, but there's always at least one idiot who does. And even if nothing happens to them, something bad always happens. Kids go missing as we're on their trail. Someone dies the next day, cut in half in a completely safe part of the park. I don't know why, but something bad always happens. I don't know exactly why they're out there, but it doesn't matter. They're here, and if we were smart, we'd tell our new officers exactly what they're capable of.
We were both quiet for a while. I was afraid to talk because I wasn't sure if he was done. He looked like he wanted to say something else. Finally, he spoke up again.
Have you ever noticed how you can't find the same ones twice?
I nodded, expecting him to continue, but he just stayed quiet, walking alongside me, and eventually he started a story about the biggest deer he'd ever seen in the park. I didn't bring up the subject again, and I didn't want to press him for any more stories. He dropped out of the op the next day. Apparently he left before the sun came up. He said he was sick. None of us have heard from him since he left. I'm going to stop here for the time being. I'll try to post the next part in the coming days. But with that being the end of summer, things are pretty busy out here. Thanks for the continued interest, guys. You've really awakened this curiosity in me that I didn't know I had. I apologize for the short update, guys. Things have gotten a little crazy around here, and I'm not sure how often I'll be able to update going forward. I really appreciate all the support you guys have given me, and while I only have a couple of stories to share with you, I'll be interested to see what you all think. A firefighter who was helping us training op told me about a call he'd gone on, supposedly to help rescue a kid from an absolutely massive tree. He said they didn't give him details, just that they needed him to come out and help because they lacked the proper equipment. He'd been called out specifically because the thing was so huge that the search and rescue officers didn't feel safe trying to climb it. He'd been a tree trimmer before joining the VFD, so it was easy enough for him to grab his old equipment and come out and help. He was led out about 2 miles, and the team stopped at one of its biggest trees in the area and pointed up. He laughed and asked the op captain how the kid could have gotten up there, made some joke about the old cat in the tree thing, but the captain just shook his head and told him to get up there and get the kid down. He said he knew something was up, but he didn't push it. He said that as he climbed this tree, he started wondering if they were playing a prank on him.
There was no way this kid should have been able to climb this fucking thing. It was massive at the base, but only about halfway up it started tapering. And I almost had to turn back a few times because I really didn't think it was going to hold me.
But he said he kept going, and when he was just about at the top, he saw a flash of blue in the branches.
I saw the kid's shirt sort of caught in a branch, and I called out to him and told him to come near me if he could, but he didn't say anything. I kept moving, calling the kid's name and telling him not to be scared, that I was there to help him. And by the time I got to him, I knew he wasn't going to answer me. I found him, or what was left of him, cradled in the fork of a branch, and the fact that he was up there was sheer luck. If he'd fallen any other way, he would have came crashing down. It wouldn't have mattered though, because that kid was dead long before he ended up in that tree. I don't know who put him there, or how, or why, but it was fucking sick. The kid's intestines had popped out of his mouth, and they were hanging in the branches. It was like some sick fucking Christmas tree, the way they were draped all over and everything. I got a better look and saw they even popped out of his ass. His guts were hanging out of the bottom of his pants. His fucking eyes were gone. I assume shoved out from whatever force caused him to fucking pop like a stress ball. You ever seen a body that's been floating in water for a long time, how their tongues kind of swell up and stick out? His was like that. I remember because there were flies crawling all over it. I think I must have gone into shock because, man, I just pushed that kid down with a stick I broke off a branch. Just kind of poked him until he fell. I don't know why I did that, and I almost lost my job because of that. But man, the thought of hauling that kid down over my shoulder the whole way, gathering his guts up and coiling them around me like ropes so they wouldn't get snagged, I couldn't do it. I've seen a lot of dead kids, more than I'd ever admit. I've seen a kid who hid in a bathtub during a house fire, boiled him alive, turned him into literal soup. But this, I don't know what did this, but the thought of touching that kid's body made me feel like I was going to lose my mind. I heard him hit the ground and I figured everyone would freak out, but they knew he was dead and they sent me up there. They didn't say anything, but they didn't shout or freak out or anything. I got to the bottom and I started to get up in the captain's face, asking him who he thought he was sending me up there when they knew damn well that the kid was dead. But he just told me it was none of my concern and thanked me for getting the evidence down. I remember he said that. I remember it specifically because it was so weird to hear it phrased that way. The evidence. Like he wasn't even a person. Like he'd never been a little kid who got lost and had fucking something unspeakable happen to him. The captain had a crew lead me back out of the woods, but he and 2 others stayed behind, and I thought that was weird. Why wouldn't they have me help get the kid out? I tried to ask, but the guys leading me out just told me they couldn't discuss an open case. I asked him what he thought had happened to the kid, and he got really pensive and thought about it for a bit. I would have to say a crush injury based on how his guts came out like that, but with those injuries you see massive contusions under the skin, obvious trauma. This wasn't like that. It was almost like the kid got caught in a big vacuum and his guts got sucked out. But even then, there was no trauma. None at all. It bothers me, man. It bothers the hell out of me.
One of the vets at the training op reads no sleep, and he recognized my stories. He knows me pretty well, and we've swapped stories before. He asked if he could share something that he's noticed about the stairs and some thoughts that he had.
I'm really glad you decided to share these. I think it's important that people be aware of what's out there, especially since the Forest Service is doing such a good job covering it all up.
I asked him what he meant.
What do you mean, what do I mean? The lack of any kind of media attention, no coverage of missing kids or bodies found miles from where they got lost in the first place? David Paulides hit this right on the head. The Forest Service is doing everything they can to keep people coming here, even if it isn't safe. I mean, to be fair, it's not like these things happen every day, but the numbers add up, and it's worth looking into, especially the stairs. I was surprised you didn't mention the flipped ones.
I didn't know what he was talking about. I couldn't remember him ever talking about something like that. He seemed somewhat incredulous.
Dude, I can't believe you've been on this long without seeing them. No one told you about them?
I shrugged and asked him to elaborate.
Well, there's the normal stairs, the ones that pop up when you're out of ways. I know you know about them, but sometimes I've run across ones that are flipped upside down. I guess it would be like if you had a dollhouse and the stairs were a separate piece. Now take that, flip it upside down so that the top step is stuck in the dirt and put way out in the woods. They're like that. I don't see them often, but they're odd to say the least. Makes me think of footage taken after a tornado where the houses are all blown apart and random things are left standing like chimneys and garden walls. Those ones really freak me out more than the normal ones because I can't really write those off as easily.
I don't scare very easily, like most of us who work out here, but that idea stuck with me and it bothers me. I'm gonna try and find more out about them. He also mentioned how many people were bothered by the guy with no face. He got really excited and told me that he'd seen something similar.
I was out on a training exercise a few years ago. I was camped out in my tent and I heard someone walking around the outside of the camp. We're told not to wander far, which you know, so I wondered if maybe it was a rookie who had gotten up to pee and couldn't find his way back. Remember that guy in our group a few years back who almost fell off the damn mountain? Well, I'm paranoid about that happening again, so I got up to see what was going on. I went to the edge of the camp and I called for whoever it was and told them that the camp was this way. But they kept going back out into the woods, so I went after them. I know it was stupid, but I was half asleep and I just really didn't want to deal with some idiot getting hurt. I followed this thing on a dead straight course for about a mile, and then it stopped at the edge of a river. I could see the outline of it because the water was reflecting the moon, and it looked like just an ordinary guy. He had a pack on, and it looked like he was facing me. I asked if he was okay, if he needed help, and he cocked his head like he didn't understand me. I always have my pocket knife on me, and it's got this little thumb light attached to it, so I turned it on and lit his chest up, just so it wouldn't blind him. He was breathing slow and deep, so I wondered if he was sleepwalking. I went closer and I asked him again if he was okay. I moved the light up, and something didn't seem right, so I stopped. He kept breathing in this real slow, deep breaths, and I sort of figured out gradually that that's what was bothering me. It was like he was pretending to breathe, but not actually doing it. His breaths were too even and deep. All his movements were exaggerated, like his shoulders going up and his chest moving. I told him to identify himself, and he made this muffled noise. I moved the light up, and I shit you not, this guy had no face, just smooth skin. I freaked out. I sort of fumbled my light, but I saw him move towards me, but he didn't actually move. I don't know how to explain it, but one thing he was at the edge of the river, and the next he was 5 feet from me. I never looked away or blinked. It was like he moved so fast that my brain couldn't keep up. I tripped and fell on my ass, and I could see this line open up on his throat. It stretched up to his ears, and his head tilted back, and he smiled at me with his throat. There wasn't any blood, just this gaping dark hole, and I swear he smiled at me with his gash in his throat. I got up, but I ran as fast as I could back to camp. I couldn't hear him following me, but it felt like he was always right behind me. even though when I looked back I couldn't see him. I calmed down, and when I got back to the camp, the fire was still going, and I guess the pack mentality of being out with other people made me stop and breathe a little. I waited by the fire to see if he'd follow me there, but I didn't hear anything else for a few hours, so I went back to bed. I know it sounds weird, but the whole thing was just so unreal that it was almost like I immediately wrote it off as my imagination.
We were telling ghost stories one night before bed just to scare each other and poke fun at whoever got creeped out. Most of the time it's the rookies, but one woman told a story that actually managed to get under my skin a little bit, and I know the same was true for the others. She said it was true, but then again, every ghost story told around the campfire is true. Somehow, though, I don't think she was making it up. It had that ring of truth that only real traumatizing events have. She said that when she was a kid, she and her friend used to go out into the woods behind her house a lot. She lived in northern Maine, where there was a lot of dense, unpopulated national forest. She said the woods up there aren't like they are here. They're so thick in places that the trees block out the sun almost completely. She and her friend grew up there, so they weren't scared being out there alone, but they did always maintain a sense of caution in certain areas. She said it was never really talked about, but they always knew not to go more than a mile or two beyond their homes. The adults never said why, but it was an unspoken rule that no one ventured out that far. She and her friends made up stories about bears as big as houses that lived out there, and they used to scare each other by hiding and making growling noises while the others searched for them. She said one summer there was a series of awful storms that blew down a lot of trees and set one part of the forest a few miles behind her house on fire. Fire crews got it under control, but she said that some of them came back not quite the same.
It was like they'd been to war. You could tell who'd really gotten scared because they had the same look on their faces. I think it's called shell shock. My friends and I said they were like walking dead people. They didn't smile or say anything, and if you went up to them, most of them left town as soon as everything was over. I asked my parents about it, but they said they didn't know what I was talking about. Once every kid was told the woods were safe again, my friend and I decided to try to hike out to where the fire had been. We didn't tell our parents about where we were going, and it was pretty exciting to think that we were disobeying them like that. We hiked out about 2 miles or so, and we started seeing burnt trees and stuff. I remember my friend got really upset because we found the skeleton of a deer curled up under a tree, and I practically had to drag her away. She wanted to bury it, but I didn't want her touching it because its antlers were weird. I can't remember why, I just remember thinking that there was something wrong with them and I didn't want either of us going near it. The farther we went, the more burnt everything got. Eventually there were no standing trees and it was like being on another planet. Almost nothing green, just brown and black everywhere. We were standing there looking at it all, and we both heard something shouting in the distance. I panicked because I thought it was my dad, and he was going to tell me I was grounded. My friend broke off and went to hide behind a big rock because she said she didn't want to be caught out there. Her parents had forbidden her to come out in the woods at all, and she'd lied and told them we were going to a movie. I followed her, and we kept listening. I could hear this voice getting closer, and I realized they were calling for help. I thought maybe it was some hiker who had gotten lost and needed directions back to town. That used to happen all the time, so I was used to helping people out. I heard him following my voice, so I kept calling out until I saw him running in the distance. He got closer, and I could see his face was all red. I told my friend to give me her pack because she had a first aid kit. She made this noise like she was grossed out, and she asked if I saw his face. I told her to shut up, and I jogged up to meet him. I stopped about halfway, and when he stopped in front of me, I could see that his nose and lips and part of his forehead were all gone. It was like they'd been sliced clean off. He was bleeding bad, and I saw the knees of his pants were red too. I took a step back, but I was too scared to move much, and he grabbed my shoulders. It felt like I got a shock, and he jerked back. He started babbling, and I couldn't tell what he was saying, except that he kept asking how long he'd been gone for. He asked me where his unit was, but I just shook my head. He looked over and he saw my Walkman and he just screamed. He just kept blabbing and touching his face, and I realized he wasn't wearing the right clothes. He had some kind of weird gray cloth jacket and almost formal pants on, and the jacket had these weird buttons and red borders on it. I kept shaking my head, and I told him that I couldn't understand what he was saying. I went to open the first aid kit, but he just screamed again and said the only thing I could understand.
"Don't touch me! You'll make me go back there!"
After that, he ran off, and I could hear him screaming the whole time. When I couldn't hear him anymore, I turned around, and my friend was crying. I just turned around and started walking back toward town. She asked me over and over what had happened and who that was, but I didn't say anything. When we got home, I told her I didn't want to play in the woods with her anymore. We're still friends, but we don't talk about that guy. Not ever.
I'll update as soon as I'm able, guys. I appreciate the continued support. It's been way too long since I posted an update, and I'm sorry about that. There's also been some confusion about the new formatting requirements on the board, which I've cleared up. So these next few stories are just going to be posted a little differently. They'll be in chronological order, and I'll do my best to tie them into each other as much as I can so that it doesn't skip too much around. When I started out as a rookie, no one had told me a lot about the job in terms of the weird things that could happen. I'm assuming this was largely to prevent me from freaking out and abandoning the park. But a few months into my service, when I was still a rookie, a friend and I were drunk at a party and he opened up a bit.
"Yeah, it can get a little crazy out there, I guess. I think the worst are the ones where people die when they just shouldn't, you know? Or when we find them dead like 10 minutes after somebody says they saw them last. They were fine when I passed them on the switchback, I swear, that sort of shit. Like, take this guy who I found one spring out on a really popular trail. Someone comes into the VC freaking out about some guy who's lying in the middle of the path in this giant pool of blood. So we run out there and we find this guy dead as a doornail, which he absolutely should be because the back of his head is like mashed potatoes. The skull decimated, brains are leaking out like custard filling, and the guy's old, so you figure, yeah, he probably fell and hit his head. Old people fall all the time, it's no big deal. Except that this area where he fell didn't have any big rocks. There's not even stumps or big branches, and on top of that, there's no blood trail, so he clearly died where he dropped. Now that's when you turn to murder, but there were people just out of line of sight with the guy. If someone came up behind him and murdered him, there's no way someone would have heard. And again, even if someone had, there'd be a trail of blood, spatter all over the place. But everyone on the scene said it looked exactly like he'd fallen and smashed his head on a rock. So what the fuck did he hit his head on? And then there was this lady I found in a different park about 5 years ago when I was back upstate. We found her in the middle of a stand of big junipers curled up around the trunk like she was hugging it. We picked her up to move her, and a fucking waterfall comes out of her mouth and splashes all over my shoes. Her clothes are dry, her hair is dry, but the amount of water in her lungs and stomach was phenomenal. Unreal, man. Coroner's report says the cause of death was drowning. Her lungs were completely full of water. This, even though we're in the middle of high desert and there isn't a body of water for miles. No puddles, no nothing. No signs of anyone else being out there. I mean, yeah, it's possible they were murdered, but why go out of the way to do it like that? Why not just stab them and be done with it? I don't know, it just sits weird with me.
Now, of course, that freaked me out a little, but we were wasted, and I guess I sort of wrote it off as a fluke, so I assume there was exaggeration there since, we were wasted. Now, I don't like talking about this next case very much. It was an awful one that I've done my best to forget about, but of course that's easier said than done. This happened about 6 months after the conversation with my friend at the bar, and up until that point, I hadn't had a lot of really weird shit go down. A few things here and there, and of course the stairs, but it's amazingly easy to get used to stuff like that when it's treated as if it's normal. This case was a little different. A guy with Down syndrome in his 20s went missing after his family lost sight of him on a major path. That was odd in of itself because the guy never left his mom's side. She was absolutely convinced that he'd been kidnapped, and unfortunately, a ranger who isn't with the park anymore insinuated that no one was going to kidnap someone, well, with that kind of disability. Not very tactful, to say the least. We wasted a lot of time trying to calm her down enough to get information about him, and then we put in an official missing persons call. Because of the urgency of the situation, him being unable to function alone, we had local police come in and help us. We didn't find him the first night, which was heartbreaking. None of us wanted to think of him being alone out there. We assumed he just kept wandering and was staying ahead of us. We brought out helis the next day, and they spotted him in a little canyon. I helped bring him back up, but he was in bad shape, and I think we all knew he wasn't going to make it. He'd fallen and broken his spine and couldn't feel his lower half. He'd also broken both legs, one at the femur, and he'd lost a lot of blood. He was confused and scared while he was alone, so he probably exacerbated the injuries by dragging himself a little ways. I know it sounds awful, but while I was riding in the copter with him, I asked him why he'd wander off. I just wanted something to tell his mother, to let her know it wasn't her fault, because he was fading fast and I didn't think she'd get to ask him herself. He was crying and said something about how the sad little boy had wanted him to come play. He said the little boy wanted to trade so he could go home. Then he closed his eyes, and when he woke up again, he was in the canyon. I'm not sure that's exactly what he said, but it was what I thought the gist of it was. He kept crying, asking where his mommy was, and I held his hand and tried my best to keep him calm.
It was cold out there.
He kept saying that.
It was cold out there. My legs was frozen. It was cold out there. It's cold in me.
He was getting even weaker, so he eventually stopped talking, and he closed his eyes for a while. Then when we were about 5 minutes from the hospital, he looked right at me with these big tears running down his face, and he said,
Mama won't see me no more. Love Mama. Wish she was here.
And he closed his eyes, and he just never woke up. It was horrible, and I don't like talking about it. That case was the first ones that really rattled me badly. Because of how badly it affected me, I reached out to a senior ranger who ended up helping me through it. As time went on and we got to know each other better, he ended up sharing one of his own stories with me. It was disturbing, but it helped to know I wasn't the only one affected by the things going on out there.
I think this must have happened before you got here, because I think if it had happened while you were here, you'd have remembered it. I know it didn't end up in the news for some reason, but I think most people who've been here long enough know about it. The park sold off a portion of land to a logging company, and it was a real controversial thing. But it wasn't that large or old of a plot, and it was right after the recession, so we needed cash bad. Anyway, they were felling this plot of land, and we get a call that we need to get our supervisors out right away. I don't know why, but they end up sending me and a few other guys along with the heads, I guess for power and numbers, to see what was up. We got there, and all these guys are crowded around a tree that they've just cut down. They were all pissed off and freaking out, and the foreman comes over and says he wants to know what we think we're up to. What the hell y'all think this is? Some kind of sick joke? You got a lot of fucking nerve pulling this shit. We bought this land fair and square. Well, we don't know what the hell he's talking about, so he brings us over to this felled tree and points at it and tells us that when they cut it down, it was just like this, and they'll be damned if they put it there. The inside of the tree was all rotted out and hollow in one spot, and when they cut it down, it had exposed the chamber, and inside is a hand. Like a perfectly severed hand, and looks like it was actually fused with the inside of the tree. Well, now we think they're pulling a joke, so we tell them that we don't like being fucked with and we start to leave, but they tell us they've already called the cops and that they'll go right to the media if we don't stick around. Well, that gets the heads' attention, so they stick around and talk to the police about it. Everyone is denying that they put the hand in there, and besides, how could anyone have done it? It's clearly a real hand, but it's not mummified or skeletal. It's brand new, probably not even a day old, and it's definitely fused with the wood. You can see it coming right out of it. The loggers, they insist they didn't put it there. Somehow this fresh human hand ended up fused to the inside of this living tree. The cops have them cut that section of the tree into movable chunks. Then they take the hand away and the area is closed off. There was a pretty big investigation, but I know they didn't get any answers. Now it's come to this legend, and as far as I know, we haven't sold any more property for logging.
As you all know, I went to a training seminar recently and heard some amazing and horrible things there. One of the guys I talked to while I was there told me a story when we were all around the campfire one night. We were both pretty drunk, you'll see a pattern here, and we were swapping stories. He told me this one.
Me and another guy were out on a field search because some campers reported screaming noises at night. So we head out there to take a look at whatever fucking mountain lion has wandered into the area, and I'm pissed. We've had 3 of them show up in the camping areas that year alone, and I'm getting tired as hell of constantly dealing with them. Plus, I don't like them anyway. They're a pain in the ass, and they're loud, and they scare the shit out of me, fucking cats. Pieces of shit. I'm groaning about it to the guy I'm with, and he thinks it's a real fucking riot. So we're seeing all these broken branches and what looks like dens, and we're pretty sure we know where this thing is. I call in and they tell me to confirm if possible, which, means they want you to step in a big pile of shit and use that as proof. I'm not seeing any though, so I basically tell them to shove it, I'm done. We know that damn thing's out here somewhere, even if I'm not stepping in its shit or inside its mouth or whatever. The guy I'm with wanders off to take a piss or whatever, and I stay behind watching this little burrow under a tree to see if maybe a fox or something's living in it, because I love foxes, man. They're cute as hell. But anyways, I'm watching this tree, and I start hearing branches cracking, and it's coming from the direction my partner went opposite of. Now, I've got my pistol, but you and I both know it's gonna do shit against a cat. I cock it and holler for my partner to get his dumb ass back, but he's too far and he can't hear me. I stand up and get my sights on where the thing is approaching, and I shit you not, man, I just about peed myself. This guy is coming towards me, and he's backflipping through the fucking woods. Like, instead of walking, he's doing these crazy fucking backflips, and I swear to God, he cleared every fucking log and bush in its path, and it was like he knew right where he was going. I yell at the guy to stop where he is, and I'm pointing that gun right at him, but he keeps coming, and I just kind of lost it. I shot at the ground in front of him, and it was a dumb fucking thing to do, but man, I didn't want this guy anywhere near me. When I fired, he was about 50 yards from me, and as soon as the gun goes off, he whirls around and goes off, backflipping back into the woods. My partner hears my gun goes off and runs back and asks what's up, and I tell him there's some fucking weirdo out here hopped up on God knows what, and we just need to get the hell out of Dodge. I let the cops know what happened, and I didn't get any trouble for firing, but man, I don't know what that motherfucker was on, but I've never seen anything like that before. Shit was absolutely butt-fuck crazy.
I think we can agree that there's some stuff going on out here in the woods, and while I'm not going to spout off about what it could be or offer any theories, what I want people to take away from all this is that it's so damn important to be safe when you're out there. I know a lot of you think you're invincible, but the fact is you can die out there, or be hurt, or go missing. It's easier than you'd ever imagine. I apologize for this relatively short update, guys. I will do my absolute best to continue this series as soon as possible. Thanks for all your continuing support. It means the world to me. Alright, well, I think that's a good spot for me to wrap things up. There's actually 2 more parts for this. So it is Friday night right now. I'm not sure when you're listening to this, but I will probably finish these next 2 parts of the series up this weekend and hopefully get it up by Monday. So once this work week starts, you guys might have 2 of these episodes to listen to. So hopefully you guys are still enjoying it and you enjoyed this one as much as the first one. And I thank you so much for listening. I really do appreciate it, you guys. It really does mean the world. But until next time, thank you guys.